All right. Well, pleasure to be here. Yeah, it's really nice. I was here 2 years ago as well, and then we had a whole outdoor stage, which was really beautiful, but happy to be inside for this year's edition. So I'm very happy to talk to you today about two topics that I'm very passionate about, systems thinking and regenerative agriculture. And let's go to the next slide. So I want to start by sharing with you where my own journey into both topics actually began, which is this beautiful little village in the middle of nowhere in central Portugal. And me and a few friends, we bought the village in 2017. It had been abandoned for about 40 years. And our idea was to actually start a community there. I spent before 10 years living in Amsterdam and Berlin. I loved city life, but I also missed nature. But on the countryside, especially in Germany where I come from, usually the people there don't have exactly the same horizon as in the city. So my idea was, how do I bring the people from the city with me to nature? By buying the city, or the village, we also got a few hectares of land. And this is what got me into the topic of agriculture, and specifically regenerative agriculture. Now, when I started looking into our agricultural system, then you quickly realize it's completely failing us. You probably heard about the protests that we had specifically in Europe this year. Farmers don't want to be farmers anymore. Young people don't want to go into farming. The average age of farmers in Europe right now is 55 years, and there's no new the next generation. So our agricultural system is failing our farmers. At the same point, it's also failing our planet. You probably all know this. This is the planetary boundaries. We're basically showing how humans would have to live if we want to be in harmony with our planet. And unfortunately, we're massively failing here. And one of the largest reasons for that is agriculture. 24% of all greenhouse gas emissions currently come from agriculture. For biodiversity loss, agriculture is the single largest contributor to it. And then you might be thinking, well, at least we're making money with it, right? Well, we already heard in the previous presentation about the issue of climate change and human health. The craziest thing is our current agricultural system is feeding us, but it's not nourishing us. So through the food that we're eating that is mostly grown with chemical inputs, people are getting sick, and these diseases to us and to our planet are causing a lot more damages than what we're actually earning with all of the income generated through agriculture on a yearly basis. And at the same time, we have regenerative agriculture, which is also nothing new. Regenerative agriculture farming practices are mostly indigenous farming practices that have been practiced by tribes for hundreds and thousands of years. And at the same time, we also have academic papers, for example, from Wageningen University from the 80s and 90s already, talking about carbon sequestration, soil water storage capacity increase, and biodiversity increase through regenerative agriculture. So the interesting thing is we have a massively failing agricultural system, and we have a potential solution with regenerative agriculture. Why is it not happening? And this is what caused me and my co-founder Ivo back in 2019 to start Climate Farmers. Climate Farmers exists with the mission to scale regenerative agriculture, and our first step is to get 10% of all European farmland under regenerative management. Back when we started, we estimated there was less than 1,000 farmers in Europe practicing this. By now, we think we're somewhere between 100 to 200,000, which is 1 to 2% of all European farmers. Overall, our mission at Climate Farmers is to help humans to find their place within the larger ecosystem again. We believe that humans can be a keystone species, such as beavers are, for example, which has a positive effect on the planetary health. Right now, we're unfortunately not living up to that potential, and we're rather destroying the planet that we're living in. And we think that regenerative agriculture is one of the best ways that we have of getting there. So when we started looking into this, coming from a startup mindset, the very first thing that came to mind was the carbon market. Because through regenerative agriculture, you are sequestering carbon in the soil, and there is such a thing as a carbon market. So carbon credits was one of the first things that we thought of. Very linear process, farmers are sequestering carbon, you pay them for doing that, and through that you scale it. And then what I did is I went on a 1-year journey. And I visited 60 farmers across Western Europe, which were all somewhere on their regenerative journey. And I tried to understand from them, how did they get into it? Why are they doing it? And why do they think it's not scaling? And what I realized, of course, it's a lot more complex. And this is then what also really led us to dive into the literature about how do you go about if you want to change a system? How do you actually do something that has substantial impact and is not just working on the symptoms level? And this is what led us to Donella Meadows, which you maybe heard about. If not, I can highly recommend her. She's pretty much the queen of systems thinking. And she came up with these levers of systems change that we have behind me. And what you might see is that there's 3 different parts of them. And the top part, the most important part, is the cultural one. And this is what we started initially with Climate Farmers. So what we did is we connected these 60 farmers that I visited with each other, because many of them, they felt lonely, they were the only ones doing it in their environment, they were sometimes even bullied by their conventional neighbors because they were doing things differently. And so a very powerful thing can be such a simple thing as a WhatsApp group, where we started collecting all of these farmers and we started bringing them together on farms and at events. And then we organized also, during the pandemic, there's quite a lot of restrictions, but we organized a conference in the world's only castle owned by farmers in southern Germany. From this, we started organizing events. We started inviting conventional farmers to come to the regenerative farms and to learn with their own eyes how regenerative farming can work in practice. Next. From this, we started growing the community, and by now we have more than 1,000 farmers spread over 21 different countries all over Europe, involved in teaching each other how to do regenerative agriculture. And then the other part that we're working on is the structural part. You might know already, but in Europe, a lot of the funding for farmers currently comes through the Common Agricultural Policy. The Common Agricultural Policy is giving out 400 billion euros over 7 years to farmers. This is for a lot of farmers 40 to 60% of their income. So unless we manage to change the money that they're getting through the policy, we will not be able to make it mainstream. And this is why we're working with other organizations such as the Club of Rome together in order to influence that policy. And one thing that we achieved last year was the Nature Restoration Law, which is giving binding biodiversity targets to member states, giving us the first baseline for potentially paying farmers in the future for increasing biodiversity on their farms, something that is right now not happening, unfortunately. A second part was that we helped to give life to an organization which is called EARA, which is a policy representation for farmers in Brussels, so they can directly lobby and speak with one farmer's voice in order to achieve the policy changes that we need to see. And then the last part is the part that was most easiest to get funding. It's not the most effective part, but it's definitely also a necessary part in systems change, which is around the collection of data. For us, that meant that we help farmers to understand their own context better through something that we call the Farm Health Report Card, where farmers can report for themselves the health of their farm and how they're doing on their regenerative journey. Around that, we did still do the carbon credits, because even though they're not the golden solution and they're not the one-fix-all thing, but they are one tool in the toolbox that we can use to make it easier for farmers to transition to regenerative agriculture. And then the third one that we currently are working on is the regenerative agriculture certification, so that also consumers in the end can see what is happening on the farm and that we can bring some transparency into regenerative agriculture supply chains. And then the last thing that I'm quite excited about is we've been working with the Presencing Institute, which maybe you know from Otto Scharmer and CRU, on creating a systems map of the European agri-food system to identify who are the different actors in there that are actually necessary to change in order to have the agricultural food system that we want to see. And here's just one example of such a feedback loop that we have in such a systems map, where you can see that we have currently a very strong dominance of the conventional agricultural system, which very much means the agrochemical industry, which is then influencing policies, which leads to these policies supporting further the focus on yield and thereby the focus on agrochemical inputs, and that then leading again to some more financial capacity for these agrochemical companies, and then through the maintaining of the system. And with that one, I'm going to leave you again. And the one recommendation that I would tell everybody is pay attention to where your food is coming from. Maybe even try to connect with the farmer that is growing your food, because in the end, the food that we're currently eating is making us sick and is making our planet sick. And it's up to all of us to make farming sexy again. Thank you.